really wrote Codex Sinaiticus? Where and when? I've just found some new evidence and verified some evidence that's starting to make me think I know where Sinaiticus came from. And it fits into the big picture so well that it's starting to settle the story of the move to create one world Bible for one world religion. When the evidence starts making puzzle pieces fit into place and make sense, it starts to make some of the lies and doubtful things not mean so much. I really want you to track with me, so I want to summarize some past information and show how it fits in with what I've just discovered. After this, you may never look at the oldest and best Codex Sinaiticus the same way ever again. Shall we begin? Hi, I'm David Daniels from Chick Publications. First, if you've watched any of the vlog series, Something Funny About Sinaiticus, you know very well that both Constantines, Constantine Tischendorf and Constantine Simonides, lied like crazy, at least at certain points. Tischendorf lied about parchment documents, scraped animal hide being in a wastebasket to be burned. First, you don't burn parchment, you burn wood or paper. Animal skin is a stinky, smoky, smoldering mess. Second, the wastebasket, quote unquote, was really a storage bin for parchments, widely used for 2,000 years at least. Third, that means that every conversation Tischendorf claimed to have about that with Carillus the librarian was a lie, totally made up out of Tischendorf's imagination. So much for his sterling reputation. And I've shown you the evidence that someone darkened Sinaiticus. I've had the theory that it was Tischendorf to make Sinaiticus look older. I only said that because Stephen Avery showed me the website codexsinaiticus.org, where I could see it for myself back in 2014. And when I looked at the 43 sheets that Tischendorf took from St. Catherine's Monastery in the Egyptian peninsula and took to the King of Saxony, they're clearly white. They still are today. But the rest of Sinaiticus looks like someone darkened it with some kind of juice. So I suspected that what Tischendorf said about his 3 visits to St. Catherine's in 1844, 1853, and 1859 were lies. But what about Simonides? When I read about Constantine Simonides, I saw a guy who could take any group and divide them in half if they were together. And he could take most guys who criticized the documents that were supposed to be ancient and get them to admit that what he sold them was real, even if the others were fake. And he did that with a number of people. Simonides also claimed that Egyptian hieroglyphics were all wrong, and that he alone could decode their meaning. This was right when they were first deciphering hieroglyphics over 150 years ago, and not everyone was convinced on how to do it. History shows Simonides was deceived or just lying about that. On top of that, it seemed he did everything. He was a patriot. He was a scholar with a doctorate. He was a calligrapher. He was a paleographer who could date ancient documents, and he was an amazing copier of manuscripts. Many people said that actually he was a forger. And to top it all off, Simonides claimed that he wrote the Sinaiticus with his own hand, starting when he's about 19 years old in 1839 to 40. It wasn't the oldest and best because it wasn't the oldest. It was a brand new replica in the form of some older manuscripts for the collection of the Tsar of Russia. And he penned it all, not in Alexandria, Egypt, but in his uncle's monastery at the beautiful Mount Athos in Greece. So, Tischendorf claimed he found and dated the oldest complete New Testament and Greek Bible ever discovered, and we should change our Bibles to match it. But Simonides claimed the Bible is really what remains of a project he wrote 2 decades before as a gift to the Tsar of Russia. Both of them seem to have no problem lying. So now, who's telling the truth? Who is lying? Both? Neither? Or parts of both? What do you do with people who've been caught telling a lie? Simple. You stop believing anything you cannot verify. So, anything we cannot verify or we can prove to be wrong, we do not let it enter into the equation. We just set it aside and don't even consider it. It doesn't matter why they lied at this point. It's just a distraction. We want the truth. So, we can only trust what we can verify. The rest is open to our best theories and interpretation of the evidence. Does that sound fair to you? Here are the basic elements of Simonides' story. In 1839 to 40, Simonides, a 19-year-old, came to Mount Athos to make a single Bible that was a compilation of a bunch of old texts made to look like an ancient manuscript. He wanted to send it to the Tsar of Russia, the rich patron supplying money to support the monasteries around Mount Athos, in the hopes that the Tsar would pay for a printing press for his uncle's monastery of Panteleimon. He wrote it, overseen by his friend, the monk Kallinikos Monachos. But while Simonides was away busy with other things, the Bible was sent without corrections to St. Catherine's Monastery. Then later, when Kallinikos was at St. Catherine's in 1844, he saw Tischendorf all excited about the Codex. Kallinikos knew that Tischendorf stole small parts of it. Then at a later time, Kallinikos saw Tischendorf say he was cleaning the manuscript, but actually he was aging it. What can we verify of this story? Simonides claimed that he created the Sinaiticus himself on Mount Athos for his famous uncle Benedict. So let's start with Mount Athos. Is Mount Athos a real place? Is it a mythical place like the myth of Mount Olympus? Sure, there is a Mount Olympus in Greece, but there aren't gods at the top. So what's the truth about Mount Athos? Here's what I found out. Mount Athos is at the northeast tip of Greece, just south of Bulgaria. It's on the third peninsula that looks like a 3-fingered glove. It's on your Bible maps. That's it, right there, the third finger. And at the top, the left top of the glove is Thessalonica. Mount Athos is a peninsula, but it's also a single mountain. It's also an autonomous, self-governing state full of monks with 20 monasteries. And it has no roads around it. So you can't drive there. They'll only allow you to go by boat. And not just anyone can go there, not even on a visit. No woman can enter at any time ever. You have to be at least 18 to come to Athos. If you want to stay for more than 1 day, you must have permission from the monastery. Then you can, with the proper paperwork and positions, stay up to 4 days, 3 nights. And they want pilgrims who come to pray, etc., not just tourists. So there is a tightly limited tourist trade for visitors today. But in the 1800s, it was much tighter. So the only way to find out what was on Mount Athos was to find out from someone trustworthy who had been there. In the late 1800s to early 1900s, there was just such a man, Spiridon Paulou Lampros. He studied literature in Athens, then got his PhD at the University of Leipzig, From 1890 to 1913, at least, he was professor of history and classical literature at the University of Athens. Twice he was dean of the university. And he even founded an historical magazine about Greek philosophy and culture and researched medieval Greek. He made a 2-volume catalog of books that he found on Mount Athos and told who wrote or copied them. And I found them. Among the names he listed, 3 are important to us. Holy Deacon and teacher Benedict, Simonides' uncle, here, 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 and here. 2, Constantine Simonides and Kallinikos Monachos. Simonides is just listed in a record of a simple project, but because of this entry, we know for sure that on March 27th, 1841, Constantine Simonides was on Mount Athos of Panteleimon Monastery, and so was Kallinikos Monachos. In his 1907 book, Literary Forgeries, J.A. Ferrer wrote that these entries in the catalog prove that Kallinikos and Simonides were at Panteleimon at the same time and associated with the same work. This is important because Simonides said Kallinikos was his friend. In 1862, London journals reported the battle between Tischendorf, who said Sinaiticus was from the 300s AD, and Simonides, who basically said, no, I wrote it myself in 1839 to 40. Then a letter came from Alexandria, Egypt, written on October 15th, 1862. It was signed Kallinikos Hieromonikos. Here are 3 of the many statements in that letter. Quote, I do myself declare to all men by this letter that the Codex of the Old and New Testaments, together with the Epistle of Barnabas and of the Shepherd of Hermas, which was abstracted by Dr. Tischendorf from the Greek monastery of Mount Sinai, is a work of the hands of the unwearied Simonides himself. Inasmuch as I saw him in 1843, that's a typo. See, here it says 22 years ago, which is 1840. In the month of February, writing it in Athos. Here's a second. Dr. Tischendorf, coming to the Greek monastery of Sinai in 1844 in the month of May, if my memory does not deceive me, and remaining there several days and getting into his hands by permission of the librarian the codex we're speaking of, and perusing and reperusing it frequently, abstracted secretly a small portion of it, but left the largest portion in the place where it was, and departed undisturbed. And here's the third. And I know yet further that the codex also was cleaned with lemon juice, professedly for the purpose of cleaning its parchments, but in reality, in order to weaken the freshness of the letters, as was actually the case. See Kallinikos Hieromonikos, Alexandria, October 15th, 1862. Some people think that Simonides made up Kallinikos, but we know from the catalog that he actually existed. We know he is with Simonides on Mount Athos 1 year after Simonides claimed he made Sinaiticus with Kallinikos watching him. I've shown you before, and I'll remind you again, of how in 1845 Sinaiticus was a bound book examined by Porfiry Uspensky of Russia. My theory was that Tischendorf cut out parts secretly and snuck them back to Saxony, to Leipzig in 1844. My theory also was that Tischendorf either darkened Sinaiticus himself or he knew who did and kept silent. Because anyone can see the difference between white pages and dark pages. And as far as I know, nobody else made these claims that Kallinikos' letter made. And I came by my theories just by looking at the evidence. So this makes me think that maybe Simonides found out all these facts, or that Kallinikos was actually there, or one of them knew somebody who was. Because these three statements match the facts. Whatever way, it adds up. So far, it seems to me that Tischendorf at first thought the Codex was genuine, so he stole parts when he couldn't get somebody to let him have the whole thing. And he had to justify the expense of going down there, and he wanted the reputation he'd get from discovering an ancient codex. I think at this point, Tischendorf was deceived. J. Michael Featherstone is writing a book right now, and for the first time, he's translating Tischendorf's private letters to his family. We know from biographies that Tischendorf wrote personal letters to his fiancée, then wife, Angelica, and to his brother, Julius. Here is one interesting point from those letters. Please note, the author turned the letters into the third person, probably to protect his copyright on the finished product. So imagine that Tischendorf is talking about himself. Tischendorf wrote in 1844 that he has come into the possession of 43 parchment folia of the Greek Old Testament, which are some of the very oldest preserved in Europe. He believes they're from the mid-4th century, and they're remarkable not only for their age, but also for other reasons. Sounds like he bought the story at first, and come into possession of, not someone gave them to him. As I said, I think he's admitting that he stole them. Anyway, he must cut his trip short. He wants to go to the Patriarch in Constantinople in order to obtain the rest of the folia beside the 43 he has, which remained at Sinai. Thus, he suspended making a public announcement of his find. That his trip to Sinai was of interest to him in thousands of other ways, his brother will certainly understand. The next year, 1845, Russian religious leader and researcher Porfiry Uspensky came to St. Catherine's. Jürgen Gottslich, in his 2010 book, in English in 2013, The Bible Hunter, The Quest for the Original New Testament, he made it sound like Uspensky was a manuscript novice. Let me quote just snippets here. Uspensky had twice been to St. Catherine's between Tischendorf's first and second visits in 1844 and 1853, and that he had personally examined the 86 sheets of ancient manuscript Tischendorf so sorely missed. What was more, Uspensky had actually seen far more of them, but just like Tischendorf, made no mention of this when reporting on his travels. You with me so far? Gottslich is right that Uspensky came to St. Catherine's twice. He did in 1845, the year after Tischendorf's first visit, and 1853, 3 years before the second visit. He's also right that Uspensky saw far more than the 86 sheets Tischendorf claimed to see. I'll show you in a minute. Then Gottslich wrote, quote, Uspensky was no manuscript expert, and he received far less academic training than Tischendorf, and did not belong to the exclusive inner circle of European paleographers. Then, he had failed to detect how old the manuscript was, and consequently, how valuable. Uspensky was no manuscript expert, and he couldn't tell the age. Is Uspensky really not qualified? How can we know? Uspensky wrote books on his travels. The first trip to Mount Sinai Monastery in 1845 was published in St. Petersburg in 1856 in Old Church Slavonic. But a missionary friend in the Ukraine got a man who had ability to translate what Uspensky actually wrote from Old Slovenian to Russian to English, did that for us. I'll read that to you in a bit. But first, let me read you a tiny quote from the book Secrets of Mount Sinai that Chris Pinto suggested I get. Listen for the date 1815. Quote, William Turner, who visited the monastery in 1815, reported, quote, to my inquiries after manuscripts and a library, the priests answered they had only 3 Bibles, and I took their word more readily, as Richard Pocock in the mid-1700s states they had no rare manuscripts. 1815, only 3 Bibles, they had no rare manuscripts. So now, here is the Archimandrite, Porphyry Uspensky's description of what he found in 1845. The best Greek manuscripts are stored in the prior's cells. There are only 4 of them. But they are very precious for their antiquity, rarity, and handwriting features, for their content, for the elegance of the beautiful faces of the saints, and entertaining drawings and paintings. In 1815, there were 3 Bibles, nothing rare. But in 1845, 30 years later, there were 4 Bibles. And that one, a Greek Bible, was very rare. It was, and still is, one of a kind. Poof! There it is. Quote, the first manuscript containing the Old Testament, which was incomplete, and the entire New Testament with the Epistle of Barnabas and the Book of Hermas was written on the finest white parchment. So the entire manuscript was what color? The finest white parchment, just like the 43 sheets now in Saxony, the Codex Frederico Augustinus that Tischendorf took the year before, in 1844. But not like all the rest of Sinaiticus today, which is yellowed and darkened in color. All the sacred texts were written in 4 and 2 columns. It turns out that Sinaiticus is the only ancient Greek codex written in 4 columns. Such a formulation of letters, without versification, no verses, and the way of writing of the sacred text invented by the Alexandrian deacon Euthalius about 446 AD, and soon abandoned due to the many gaps between the columns on the expensive parchment, prove that this manuscript was published in the 5th century. That's the 400s AD. So as I said in another vlog, it couldn't be from the 300s. It had to be after 450 AD. And that's the date they give to Codex Alexandrinus. It is notable in many ways. It comprises a special order of the sacred books, intelligible presentation of the Psalms and the Song of Solomon, many different readings on the margins of the New Testament texts, and their particular dialect. In another place, Uspensky says it's the Alexandrian dialect. Then he listed the books in the same order and form we find them in today. It looks like Uspensky knew exactly what he was talking about. He clearly described the Codex Sinaiticus as a bound book. In February 2016, Stephen Avery contacted Dirk Jonkind, author of the 2013 book, Scribal Habits of Codex Sinaiticus. Listen to what he says about Tischendorf. It is still fascinating how Tischendorf got away with the part published in Codex Frederico Augustinus, and whether or not he had seen the New Testament part already in 1844. He, Tischendorf, only speaks about the 130 leaves of the Greek Old Testament, but I would not put it beyond him to consciously suppress his knowledge of the wider manuscript, which would mean that Tischendorf and Uspensky, between 1844 and 45, the manuscript was not reunited at all, as it had been together. So as of February of this year, Dirk Jonken was open to the idea that Tischendorf got away with the 43 sheets. That sounds like Kalanickos' claim that Tischendorf secretly cut out and stole those 43 sheets. And so Tischendorf also hid the fact that it wasn't a bunch of loose sheets, but a bound book. That would match the testimony of Uspensky, Kalanickos, and Constantine Simonides, and my theory. And that would make Tischendorf a bold-faced liar. I could go on and on, but I bet you want to know what I just found out. Okay, I already did a video on the Shepherd of Hermas, which very largely matched the copy of Hermas that Simonides published and that Tischendorf himself had edited in 1856. There it is. That's Simonides' text. But just before Chris Pinto released his new movie, Bridge to Babylon, he asked me what I thought about the other book at the end of Sinaiticus, the Epistle of Barnabas. I prayed about it, and then I made a chart. I made columns. I put the text of Barnabas from Sinaiticus in one column right off their website, and then made a blank column for notes and opened another copy of Barnabas. Oh, I forgot to mention that Chris Pinto showed me that Constantine Simonides published his own book of the Epistle of Barnabas in 1843. Let me give you a bigger view here. Constantinou Simoniadou. Right here, see? He published it in 1843, the year before Tischendorf even set foot at St. Catherine's. It had a main text compared with 7 other Greek versions of Barnabas in the footnotes. Karakalou, Onesimou, Iveron, Anaktetou, Gaspareros, Mavrikiou, and Lavra. It was published in Smyrna, Turkey, and was reviewed in the Greek publication, The Star of the East, in the same year. The review was on April 26th, 1843. That's when I checked all my info on Barnabas again, and I found out that until Sinaiticus showed up, the Western world had never seen a Greek original for the first 4+ chapters of Barnabas. 1:1 to 5:7a. I made my own little mini book here. So I wondered, how would Simonides' first 4 chapters of Barnabas compare to the Sinaiticus? Is the Sinaiticus version of the first 4 chapters the real one? Because this is the one that became the model for every copy of Barnabas right up to this day. Or would the Sinaiticus be like Simonides' book? If so, then only 2 known documents in the world had the first 4+ chapters in Greek: Simonides and Sinaiticus. Simonides' Shepherd of Hermas is already almost just like Sinaiticus, and Simonides had 2 versions of them, and I've only seen 1. If Barnabas, though, was also the same, then that would really push my thinking that Simonides helped make Sinaiticus like he said. But if Simonides' Barnabas was different, then we could just say that Simonides made up the first 4 chapters in his copy, and that would be the end of that. It took a while to get used to the way they spelled some words. It's a low-resolution copy from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki Library, Thessalonica. So my eyes had to adjust, and I played with the graphics too. But eventually, I figured it out, and I compared the text. I could really go into a lot of detail, and maybe I will for my book, but for now, let me just summarize what I found. Look at the Sinaiticus. This right here is the end of Revelation. And right here is the start of Barnabas. It's literally connected. So it was intended that Barnabas be connected to Revelation, part of the New Testament. The Shepherd of Hermas is actually in a separate part, so we don't know about that one, but we know that this one was supposed to be stuck together. Okay? Now, this main text here is not exactly the same as Simonides' text. There are some differences. But look at those 7 versions of Barnabas in the footnotes. 3 of them are named after monasteries on Mount Athos. Others are named for specific people. And as I compared Sinaiticus carefully to these footnotes, something amazing happened. I'll just have to summarize. If I take Simonides' text, then substitute whatever readings are in the Gaspareos manuscript, that is almost exactly identical with the text of Sinaiticus. So, if the Sinaiticus main text of Barnabas is Gaspareos manuscript of Barnabas, it's right out of Simonides' book. And if I take the Sinaiticus and correct it with all those tiny little notes that they added to the text, you can go to codexsinaiticus.org and see them for yourself. Like I put them in here. These things, okay? If I take the Sinaiticus and correct it with all those tiny little notes that they added to the text, that matches the main text of Simonides' book. In other words, Simonides' book equals Sinaiticus plus its corrections notes in the main text. The Sinaiticus Barnabas is Simonides' book when it's corrected with Gaspareos notes. In other words, Gaspareos' text of Barnabas is the Barnabas of Sinaiticus. Seriously, I have more, but I have to stop. I think there's a smoking gun, and you can come to your own conclusions. Here are mine. 1. Simonides wrote or dictated at least Barnabas and the Shepherd of Hermas, but he was a master calligrapher, so he really might have written them with his own hand, as Kallinikos stated, and as the evidence made plausible. They were both there. Kallinikos knew stuff no one else knew, and no one else said, that just happened to match the facts. I think Kallinikos saw Tischendorf. Now, if Simonides wrote the main text of Barnabas, then he wrote the whole New Testament. Because aside from the 3 sheets of corrections, the 12 pages, the entire New Testament with Barnabas and Hermas has the same handwriting all the way from Matthew to Revelation, Barnabas and Hermas. 3. Tischendorf is a lying liar who lies. But he thought he got away with the real thing, then eventually figured it out. It wasn't old at all, but he still wanted the gold and the glory. So, in either 1853 or 1859, Tischendorf darkened all the rest of the pages to make them look old. Then he kept covering up his lies over and over again. He wanted fame and fortune. He got them, but it didn't last long. He died in 1874 before he even finished his master project on Vaticanus. 4. Simonides' motive was to make a Bible that looked ancient and would please the Tsar enough to buy an expensive printing press for Simonides' uncle Benedict's monastery, Panteleimon. But how that Bible was designed doesn't match the format of any Bible anyone had ever seen before. 5. I think someone influenced things behind the scenes, getting Simonides to make a 4-column manuscript, getting Tischendorf to go to St. Catherine's. I think it was done that way to make Tischendorf think it was the fulfillment of his interpretation of Constantine's order to Eusebius to make a Bible in 3s and 4s. I did another vlog about that. Vaticanus was in 3 columns. Right here. You see? And Sinaiticus was in 4 columns. Right here. See that? Which suddenly appeared in the Vatican Library, this one, in 1475. That's when the Vaticanus suddenly showed up, just like that. Sinaiticus, in 4 columns, suddenly appeared at St. Catherine's Monastery between 1815 and 1844, but most likely it was in 1843. And it was put there, according to Callinicos, by the Patriarch Constantius, while Simonides was off publishing Barnabas in Smyrna. 6. I think it's clear that this Bible, found by Tischendorf in 1844, is what occultist Manly P. Hall was referring to when he said in 1944, quote, "For the last 100 years, we have been trying to get out an edition of the Bible that is reasonably correct, but nobody wants it. What's wanted is the good old King James Version, every jot and tittle of it." 7. I think this messed up, corrected, rushed, pushed text was suggested to Sinaiticus, suggested to Simonides, it gets confusing, by someone. Maybe it was someone secretly working for the Pope, like a Jesuit. This Bible fulfills the paleographer's dream. It gives him stuff to work on and guess at for the rest of his life. And it led the scholars straight to the Codex Vaticanus, a manuscript nobody really cared about before the 1800s. Because there really wasn't anything else like it. And there was nothing, it was nothing like the historically preserved text that you find here. And most importantly, it, with this, led away from the King James Bible, God's preserved words in English. Because if you can be pulled away from the King James, history shows you can be led into just about anything else. Even one world Bible for one world religion. Finally, I heard that Simonides claimed he'd written little notes all over the codex, acrostics and stuff, that showed that Simonides was the author of the book. In all my looking, I could only find one reference. Only one was listed in all the books I've read, and that was Genesis 24. When I found out that that one part of Genesis was found, I was so happy to find out it had Genesis 24. It was finally reunited with the main text. Now I could look into the margins and see for myself. If the acrostic was in the margin, it was proof that Simonides wrote it. If it was blank, then it was proof that he didn't. Take a look for yourself. What's missing? Look at it again. Someone cut out 2 parts of the main text and threw away the margins. Now, why do you suppose that happened? I am so glad I can just trust God's preserved words in English and place my complete faith in it. Then I can leave the doubting to others. I hope after this you will too. God bless you and have a wonderful day.